Hello, hi. Um, wow, back again we are. Oh my god, don't fuck with me right now. You're too loud, I tell myself. Um, yeah. So here we are with places. Really working to um, continue to perfect this process of blueprint making. This morning I realized I had already drawn all the images for this, and I know I told you that I had, but I also experienced during one of the sets of three, during one of the sets, I experienced realizing that a couple were missing because my indecisive bitch ass during the blueprint making process had decided internally that persons was going to be one thing, places would be one thing, and then things would be one thing, so it'd be one set of three. But upon finishing the blueprints, I had elaborated further and given them all numbers. So somewhere in that process, kind of dropped the ball and made a bunch of blueprint lists, or pretty much triplicated the amount of work I expected to do. And later, when I came on to upload and publish those things, I found myself frustrated that I hadn't drawn the necessary thumbnails. And I, funnily enough, made the assumption that that's exactly precisely what had happened. But that wasn't precisely what had happened. It's just that I couldn't find the thumbnail that I needed at the time because I had named it something slightly different. And it turned out I had already drawn all the images, ironically, except for one. And the one I hadn't drawn was this one that we're recording now. So that's fun. I find that oddly reassuring. That's human error for you. I have a tendency to confuse myself and others on whether or not I am all powerful and all knowing. But obviously, I can't be God, because I cannot be omnipresent as well. So there's no way I could possibly be all powerful or all knowing without being omnipresent. That's just impossible. So moving on from there, can't be God, can't be perfect, definitely human. And human error, as I've mentioned, is kind of the spice of life. It's what gives us free will. It's what allows us to randomly generate things actually randomly. And that means we are constantly in a state of push and pull, this or that, struggling along different spectrums between different finite binaries. I'm not sure. I know I could talk about these topics forever. I think it's called ad infinitum, using slightly different words, but otherwise saying the same thing. And I don't want to bore anybody by doing so, but it is significant in and of itself in its own way, and it's worth repeating, and it's also worth starting this episode off that way. Because now we're doing places, environment, spaces were the last two, and now our third one, I chose the word home. Home is the last place that I chose to illuminate. Obviously, in your elementary education, I'm sure that you have encountered other types of nouns that are also places, and I'm sure you can think of many, many, many places in your life that you spend in those areas. And one reason I chose nouns and not verbs is because nouns are static things. They are relatively fixed and unchanging, whereas verbs are much more dynamic. They're active, and they require modifiers. So, moving on from that, I felt it was really, really easy because this cast is intentionally meant to be a generalization, or to speak in generalities, about topics that are overarching, all-encompassing, what I assume is relatively felt by all or experienced by all, and hopefully putting it into terms that everyone can understand, relate to, and feel moved by. So, making generalities for the noun of places, that was pretty easy, right? I chose environment, I chose spaces. Spaces was very general. That was, what's the word? A slant rhyme, in its own way. But it was a stretching of the use of nouns to encompass multiple spaces, or to use such a general word as space for a place. Space and place. I pretty much created a tautology there when I did that, but I figured it would be allowed within the context of encouraging people to consider specific spaces, head spaces, digital spaces, and physical spaces that are places to them. And I kept it general because I want you thinking about that. I don't want you thinking about mine necessarily, or me, making assumptions about yours. So left that tautological slant rhyme just hanging out, I suppose. But I'm sure it was entertaining for some who like that kind of thing. And now we are doing home. That is a place. That is a singular place I think we all have in common. Whatever that means for you, right? To me, home has never been a physical physical place so much as it has been a state of mind, or a person at times. Although I have realized that that's kind of codependency. But people, I think, can be home. And I have, this idea of what home has evolved for me over the course of my life, as I'm sure it has for you as well. And there are a lot of factors that go into something to make it feel home or homey, right? Coziness and comfiness is one of the top ones. And I have always encountered a bit of discomfort when meeting people and telling them my name is Cozy. They're like, ooh, you're taking that entire concept as a name? Big fucking move. And because I've stayed like a relatively small character in the grand scheme of things, it's been pretty permissible. Like, I'm a cozy person. I'm pretty warm and fuzzy. Like, that's a part of my personality. It's intentional. I love that. I love trying to embody my nickname. It is a nickname. It's short for Cosette. I know I've told you. My family used to call me Cosetti. It got even shorter. It became Cozy. It's a cute thing. I don't know. I'm a huge fan of cute things too, and I like being one. I try. Not perfect, human error. But it's pretty big britches of me to be like, oh yeah, my name's Cozy, in a larger character sort of sense, trying to establish a name for myself. And as you might imagine, that has interrupted my curation of home and what that means for me. It has been a bumpy ride, to say the least. And I'm sure my listeners know that, because I know that my first listeners are people that I consider to be a part of my home or my heart space, and they could not help but notice how bumpy the ride has been, because they've been in it with me. So that's something that I would like everyone to keep in mind when they're thinking about home, or they're thinking about me and what I'm doing here. It's not easy. It does take an exceptional amount of social support, and I mean exceptional. I would argue over 100. And that group is home to me, right? It's the social fabric, the age lace in the parlance of Robert Jordan, which, oh my God, although he is kind of The age lace is a little bit more complex than that. But wow, what a weaving of just concepts. I can't wait to reread that series. I used to reread. I was telling my therapist this. I used to reread books all the time, like my favorite series. I would reread them, sort of as a form of affirming, like, yeah, that's I still believe that, or I still resonate with that, or I still empathize with that, whether it's a character or experiences. It helped me feel real in the world, and I went beyond that, to a certain extent, empathizing with authors. Like, what kind of person wrote this? What kind of things would they have to have been thinking of or encountering or, experiencing to have written this? Because writing takes fucking time. It takes time, it takes concentrated attention. And writing novels such as The Wheel of Time, for example, 15, 16 book series, 600 to 800 pages per book. That's mass market, but oh my god, that's a lot. So it takes a lot of focus, it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of desire to be heard, and to get these complex thoughts and feelings that you're experiencing out into the world in a way where the time it takes to consume it and really understand it and integrate it is roughly double or more than the time it takes to create it. That's huge. That's a big working. That's obviously magic. I shouldn't have to point that out, but time is money, sure, but it's also energy. Our energy being expanded over the course of a certain amount of time. And as a mortal creature, of course, I'm constantly grieving about how finite my time span is. I think that's just normal, and that's one reason we write stories about immortals, like vampires or, gods, demigods. We love to contemplate immortality, and because we don't want this beautiful singular mortal life to really end, and we find it precious. That's an innate quality of our humanity, I do believe. But I am one of those people who very, very firmly believes that humanity is good deep down. Like each of us individually, we start good, we are good, and we're more like in a constant battle against that which makes us unwell or not good. I'm not good today. Not feeling great. And it's true, I'm not feeling great. But I do want to talk about home, and I want to talk about my home. I want to talk about your home. I want to talk about the home we share, as in this earth, this universe, this galaxy. And I want to talk about what these concepts mean. Like, how do we determine what counts as home? Home is obviously a place you feel comfortable. It's a place that you feel safe to be yourself. It's a place that you feel safe from harm, obviously. I guess to be yourself is a privilege. Safe from harm would have to come first, wouldn't it? It's a place that you feel you have some amount of dominion over, right? Or if not dominion, then the people with you have dominion over it, and you're safe in their care. So that is a huge, huge ask. And it looks different for different people, right? Like, trying to empathize with nomadic culture and being like, what is home to those folks? Because I'm used to having a fixed, stationary, you could argue static concept of home. It's stuck in one spot. It doesn't move. But empathizing with nomadic cultures is how I've managed to move so many times in my life, travel so much in my life, continue to stay in motion so much in my life, because if I wasn't empathizing there, I would be fucked. Like, I'd be so unhappy with that much motion. It would just absolutely ruin me. It would wreck me. I once looked up like the top causes for stress, like life stress, the type of stress that sends people into depressive episodes, or that gives them generalized anxiety disorder, like big stress. What are the top causes of stress, and one of the top 3 was moving around, moving house, picking up and relocating. And I thought that was so funny, because Google has, and I do mean Google, but Google has a habit of presenting information as though it's axiomatic fact. And that is, I want, part of me is like, well, it's a lack of literacy on the end user. And I'm always for advocating educational, literacy campaigns in that sense. But no, it's also the search engine and how it presents information. It matters, so thinking about that and being like, okay, well, moving is the top cause of stress, but not if I was a nomadic creature. Not if I considered myself to be nomadic. Not if I empathized with nomadic ideals. And that's really fucking hard. You have to have examples. You have to have living, embodied examples, ideally. You have to have maybe physical experience of examples. Spending some time, doing the hitchhiking across Europe, staying in hostels thing is actually kind of important to having that sort of embodied experience of what being semi-nomadic really looks like, especially if you do it for several years. You really get a feel for it. Now, I've never done that, to be fair. It was a dream, but I never did that. But I thought about doing it, and I thought about the people who do it, and I thought, well, if those people are doing it and they're not, suffering extreme stress and anxiety for it, or the trade-off that they're getting for the stress of it is worth it. There's something else going on, that their subjective well-being, their continued sense of personal happiness is relatively unaffected by the uncertain nature of their, where they're resting their head at night. And that's, there's less than ancient, a few hundred years ago, examples of the 600-year-old indigenous federation that populated most of Middle and South and when I said Middle America, I also meant the USA. But most of the Americas, really, before settler colonialism really really just put their boots on the ground, as it were, and brought their biochemical war to these lands. There were hundreds, maybe even thousands of indigenous groups, semi-nomadic, who were loosely federated with one another. It was mostly trade, sharing certain secret static cities, things like that, but stationary cities, sure. We're talking about pueblos mostly, and this is an imperfect rendition of a very complex history that has been imperfectly preserved over time, at least partially because those people, more than writing things down, believed in a living knowledge of things, believed in passing knowledge through the living experience of interpersonal relating. They felt that was a more powerful way to experience the world and to pass knowledge in the world, about the world, to one another. And that is an incredibly powerful way of knowing things, right? When you think about epistemology, or how people know, how do you know things? The living and embodied experience and the handing off of that experience and knowledge is a very powerful means of knowing something, especially if you can assist someone in experiencing those things as well, or create conditions or the environment necessary for them to do so. It's a very powerful way of sharing and receiving knowledge. So, hugely important, but there is a need to write things down. And I think, I loved it when Jacqueline Carey in the Namaz Kiss trilogy was describing this duality of knowing, of the living knowledge, and how you're learning things by just being in the world and being present with the world, versus writing things down, reading them, memorizing them, regurgitating them. It's a balance, I think, obviously, but it has to be an intentional and thoughtfully maintained balance. Otherwise, it's not going to really help us as much as it could. And yes, I do think we will, what did I say the other episode? We'll like lose our potential or something. Not lose our potential. We won't reach our full potential. And we're like going so unfull potentialed right now. And I still agree with that. But anyway, yeah, so my concept of home has been consistently evolving. And I have always thought of myself as somewhat of a lone wolf, in the sense that I violently oppose emotionally this idea that women are the weaker sex. I was conditioned, I was assigned female at birth, and the social conditioning I received was very patriarchal oriented. There was a lot of messaging that I internalized about my worth relating to being a woman and femininity. And I've worked really hard to combat that. And to work on that kind of internalized misogyny and kind of create something different, in response. And so part of doing that has been this conceptualizing myself as like this singularly alone individual, like striking out on her own, at least partially because it's very difficult to determine like healthy equidistance with others under conditions of societal assumption of your lack of value. Just is. That's going to be a difficult one. So, trying to keep all that in mind. And I know I might be exhausting some of you with how much I try to keep in mind. But, it gives me a sense of reassurance to feel like I sort of kind of have somewhat of a handle on what's affecting me in the world. So this idea of being a lone wolf, in a societal sense, in a feminist sense, is, I know I said the F word, oh fuck me, right? But in this sense, has meant like an acceptance of sacrifice and also an acceptance of difficulty, like the difficulty level of being a woman who lives alone, who like operates alone, who attempts to like be completely self-sufficient, because that's been my goal, has been independence, self-sufficiency, like above all else, that has been my goal. And I've had relationships, I've even been married, and continued to try to work on that goal. And part of the sacrifice I've made with putting that goal first has been relationships and marriage, and among other things. But that, and I'm not saying that like my purpose is just and righteous and the sacrifice is worth it, because honestly, like, that sacrifice wasn't necessary under conditions of a truly equal society. And I'm not saying like I regret the divorce, but what I'm saying is that like things would not have worked out the way that they did, or I would not have hurt the people that I hurt if we had had a more egalitarian society along gender norms and social constructs. So, because I wouldn't have needed to prioritize my own independence, it would have been a default. And then I might not have had to sacrifice the things that I did in order to do it. But point here being, my concept of home is fiercely independently self-constructed, and to the point of like frustrating others, frustrating myself, at least partially because sometimes I just go too hard. Like sometimes I go too far in that independence. Sometimes a lot of times I struggle to accept help. I struggle to know really, like, is this my freedom, or is this a bullheaded insistence on doing something my way, even though it's not necessary. And I do tend to look to alternative love style relationships. No, that's wrong. I tend to look to non-heteronormative relationships to give me tips and tricks on how to like navigate that, right? Men loving men and women loving women are all people who have had to navigate that concept of home under not hetero conditions, right? Under homogenous conditions in the gender sphere. And so they've given me a lot of good ideas about what that looks like for myself and for others, or what I think it should look like. And I know we keep coming back to gender and sexuality. We do keep coming back to that, as well as neurodiversity. But I think I made pretty clear in my positionality statements earlier on from YouTube what that means and why that is. And also in the last set when I was talking about persons, why I find neurodiversity and just diversity of sex and gender to be so powerful as a social construct in liberation practices and in species adaptation, as far as continuing to grow more diverse. It is really the only way we're going to survive. I think I made that pretty clear. I feel like I made a really good logical argument for that. So yeah, it is going to keep coming up because it's going to continue to be relevant. We only won the right to like marry in same-sex relationships in 2008, and that's been, under threat, and it hasn't been protected. Some of these things, and again, back in, where I'm in America, we're talking about America, the great melting pot that we're all burning in. Yes, that was an Immortal Technique reference. Dance with the Devil. Go check it out. Holy shit, you'll cry. It's just horrific and brutally honest, and I love it so much. But I got distracted by wrecking of song. But these things need to be constitutionally protected. And I know that the current fascist regime really fucking sucks, but somebody pointed out to me when Roe v. Wade was overturned that this is actually an opportunity to like embed it more deeply in our legal infrastructure. And one thing that I think many, many Americans, many people the world over who are struggling with settler colonial, symptoms, because it's a social illness, like what happened here. We are dealing with the karmic retribution of slavery, and many, many other things. But these are generational traumas that are continuing to affect us the way that trauma affects people. It affects us individually, it affects us as groups, and it is going to continue happening until we start doing more intentional cycle breaking, both at an individual level and at a group level. So sorry if I sound like I'm repeating myself here, but this is history, repeating itself because we haven't learned the lesson, and it sucks. It's painful, but I think we're sophisticated enough and literate enough now that we can actually discuss it and we can actually do something about it in a more meaningful way. And I'm here to help cheerlead that. I do need to remind everybody, I am a cheerleader. I am here to help us stay positive and think about these things that are hard to think about with a positive attitude. That's all I've done. That's all I've curated in myself for a very long time, is the ability to do this. I can't do a lot else because it's a really big fucking task. It's hard. So please be kind to me. And remember, I am a cheerleader. And if you have internalized misogyny surrounding cheerleaders, try to remember they're athletes. And if you need help with that, maybe try take a pole dancing class, because, oh my God, strippers are also athletes, and it's really fucking hard to do. So, if you're struggling with that, I would recommend working it out on your own. But my point is, we share this earth, we share this home, and right now we're sharing me and my fellow Americans are sharing. Do we really impeach a guy for getting a blowjob, but not for colluding with Russia? Okay, sorry, I'm getting distracted. But yeah. Wait, no, he did get impeached, right? But he got reelected? No, he couldn't have gotten impeached if he got reelected, because you can't be reelected if you get impeached, I'm pretty sure. Anywho, yeah, so here in America, we're dealing with some pretty serious shit, and it's really depressing. And one of the things that people that I have encountered in my, lifelong of generating these types of discussions and thinking and elaborating these themes, I know my life isn't really that long so far, but please spare it if you will, and let me continue doing this. Yeah, I know that's going to be more up to me than it is to you. It's okay. I take responsibility for myself in that respect. But think kind thoughts, give me good vibes and shit. Thank you, I appreciate it. Yeah, so this problem that a lot of people face, I'm going to outline 2 pretty serious issues that people struggle with when it comes to overcoming apathy in the face of such overwhelming oppressive states. Because it's overwhelmingly oppressive, and the more shitty things that you learn about how this system, because it is a system, but how the system operates, the worse the apathy and the, emotional oppression gets. So 2 things that I've noticed people really, really, really run into on this particular topic. And the first thing is, how do you get from point A to B? How do you get from a really, really deeply oppressive system to a completely liberated people? That's a great question. And I know I've mentioned this before, but Audre Lorde asks, can you really fix the master's house with the master's tools? Can you use the same tools to create a more liberated space? The tools of oppression, can they be deconstructed and redesigned towards liberation? Great question. And I think it's sort of, who was that? Somebody told me this story about a woman who was asked about the question of forgiveness, and her answer was that her mind is still floating through that question like wind through grass, and she was simply not ready, like she didn't have an answer yet. And that's how I feel about the master's house, master's tools thing, because I have seen tools repurposed, and I am a huge fan of tools, all sorts of tools. So I do think, can you fix the house? No, but you could deconstruct it and rebuild. You could leave, but take the toolbox, right, and use them in other places. Build your own fucking house, or don't have a house. Build something entirely new. Build a fucking spaceship. So I do think it's possible, but not in the way described. God, who was that? Starts with an M. I'm still thinking about the Blades of Grass thing. No, it wasn't Walt Whitman, although, he does have that poem. But yeah, people really struggle with how do we get from point A to point B, because the answer is a bunch of tiny steps, and a bunch of tiny steps feels like no progress. And that's really it. You're like, how do we get women's reproductive health secured in legislature in a way that genuinely ensures women experience a more liberated life, right? That they are able to make choices by and for themselves without interference from a government, without interference from a state, without being under the dominion of a man that is dating them or helped to give birth to them, right? How does that look? Is it possible? That's a big question. We are from the reproductive health standpoint subject a lot to our biology. There are things we just can't help about our existence that will be taken advantage of. But I'm getting slightly off track, and I'm going to lose the crowd if I keep going in that direction. So, where was I going? Oh yeah, point A to point B. The answer is a lot of small steps. We're going to have to collectively elaborate these themes often enough and long form enough and with enough conviction that ultimately all of culture changes to honor those rights, right? It can't just be legal, it has to be cultural. And it's the same with all other forms of liberation. It cannot just be, oh, we've legally decided to protect these things, although that really, really helps as far as reinforcing cultural norms. But it's culture, it's the way that we treat each other that actually creates ultimate change. And we go back and forth on that. From a matriarchal, patriarchal perspective, that battle has been a losing battle over centuries. So many centuries. Most matriarchies are no longer in existence, and the ones that still exist are small and pocketed. But it doesn't have to be that way. You know, this idea of egalitarian society seems impossible and very unreachable. When in the midst of what feels like the dying echo of any even social concept of matriarchy. But generally speaking, that's actually around the time those things come back around. We are creatures who are constantly in a balancing act. I'm gonna just put that out there. So yeah, there's this great book called The Power. They made it into a TV show. I'm sure I've mentioned it before. It has Toni Collette in the TV show. She's amazing. She also did another one called Unbelievable. Fucking great stuff. But in the book, I think it's by Naomi Alderman, I think, and I know I've mentioned this, but in the book, the power dynamic shift between male-female sex has, and yeah, she actually does represent intersex pretty well as well, just for the record. She super illuminates the spectrum of biology and the human species in a way that's really easy to internalize when you read that book, and I appreciate that. But yeah, the power dynamic shift is abrupt and immediate because women kind of physiologically adapt in a way where they're able to like electrocute people with a touch. I know I've mentioned this. I definitely know I've mentioned this, but the geopolitical fallout there around the world, she describes it. This was in 2018. She describes it so fucking well. And I took it as kind of like a warning, you know, as somebody who's been just pell-mell violently feminist for most of my life as a reaction to oppressive patriarchal systems. I've also, you know, I read that and I was like, fuck, she's right, you know, like, are we going to continue cycles of abuse once you're on top? Do you just like start abuse again, or do you find a new way? And most of the really progressive feminists I have encountered, especially in the last 10 years, are already thinking about that, and they're already creating like new paths that do not involve this domination and subordination structure, or when involving that structure, continue to keep in mind that it's a temporary state, right? It's not I'm dominating you forever. It's like I'm dominating you right now in the moment, and then we're going to move on back to being more equal. And, you know, how do you create a system like that? How do you create a state like that? How do you create a social, cultural makeup that looks more like that from an egalitarian perspective? And it really does, I'm going to go back to literacy here, but it really does involve more socially dynamic creatures, people who are more culturally adept at changing or shifting moment to moment, depending on the climate, depending on the social climate in the room, right? We started growing in a way like we had words and we're able to enforce words like read the room, cozy, or yeah, right? So That's huge. And I know I said that this episode was going to be about home, but this is all very relevant to home. Your home space is going to be the most influential one. Your concept of home is going to be the most influential one when it comes to thinking about social interrelating in a broader sense, in a socio-political sense, in a global sense, geopolitical sense. I know. How tired of you, or how tired are you of me saying geopolitical? Just be grateful I'm not diving into neoliberalism or something. Yeah. So this concept of home is integral to our survival as a species. And as I have continued to argue, we need to be a little bit more dynamic in the way that we conceptualize things and the way that we socially interrelate. It's going to be the make or break of redistributing wealth and redistributing people. And when I say wealth, I mean resources. But redistributing these things along more equitable means is not going to work out at all if all of us don't have a more both unified idea of what home looks like. For example, what do we want to do with this country we call home, fellow Americans? If you live in this place and subject to its laws, then I consider you an American. Yeah, and honestly, I keep calling us Middle America because we're like North and Mid and South. Like if you take it in a longitudinal way, middle would be, I don't know, like the top of California down to Puerto Rico, just about, maybe Guatemala. That's mid. And then south, right, like, is Panama down. North is, yeah, Canada and all the northern states on the top layer. And nobody wants to divide us along longitudinal lines necessarily, but latitude and longitude is the most, not to Spock it up on you, but it's the most logical way to redistribute people along environmentally sustainable lines, right? We want a future, we want a stable future for humanity to kind of gather itself in order for us to have the time to grow, to adapt, to change and overcome, to work on ourselves. Oh my God, you know, when during COVID this meme was going around constantly, it was like, this is a COVID-19 is a sign from Mother Nature that we all need to go to our rooms and think about what we've done. And oh my God, yeah, that hit because it was accurate, or it hit because it felt like at least it was a good idea. But what if we did it like, you know, over centuries? What if we really, like, I know I keep saying this totally absurd thing, but what if we actually redistribute people and resources, do like a great migration along more environmentally sustainable and hospitable lines for a 200-year siesta in which we try to get our act together and take a breath from all of our bloody history. You know, like, let's really heal. Because honestly, one of the biggest reasons I see, according to me, that nations are so bitterly standing in opposition to one another is this concept of haves and have-nots. We know for a fact that there are people, like large groups of people, who are further behind in the healing journey than others. And that's a privilege thing. That's a creature comfort. That's a people who have been insulated from harm versus people who have not sort of thing. So that's going to be wildly important if we want world peace. I know people are like, Cozy, you can't just like talk people into world peace. I'm like, I think I actually can. Maybe I could try. You know, and if I do it, others could pick it up. Like, these concepts are rapidly adaptable, and we are intelligent and sophisticated enough to make it happen. So I'm gonna talk into that room, and you can do what you want with it. But there are people who are going to be behind. They deserve the same amount of time. And so when we talk about redistributing people and resources along more equitable means, you have to start with environment. You have to start with what's going to be sustainable for a very long period of time, because those people, everybody needs and deserves the chance to heal. And so obviously, next thing that I would suggest is that the people with or who have had the longest history of privilege and who have had the most insulation from harm are paired essentially with those who have not, or who are the most traumatized, the most raw, the most in need of healing, as well as like trained healers, right? Mind healers, physical healers, people who are trained for facilitating wellness. And those people all need to be combined together to maximize our potential for healing and growth. Like, that would fucking do it, right? I know it's crazy, but it would work. That's always been my thing, is like, I can think of a million solutions to all of these terrible problems that everybody keeps complaining about. I wonder why nobody's saying these things, and still don't have an answer for that, so I just decided to start saying stuff. But maybe they're just not saying them around me, right? Like, I've just lived in this bubble my whole life, and I'm not invited to the bespoke conversations that are happening outside of my sight or outside of my hearing. And God, do I hope that's true. I do have some inkling that might be the case. And also, I know that we all have to kind of work things out on our own, in our own time, at our own pace, and that these things are evolving and happening and being discussed at a variety of levels in a variety of spheres. So I know I'm not the only one saying or thinking this kind of thing. But last thing that I'm going to mention about reforming a new collective concept of home, a global collective concept of home, is that migrant communities and people who have been displaced are going to also have the best knowledge and skill sets for assisting in that move. And so they need to be honored, they need to be protected, they need to be cared for as though they hold important information for our species' future, because they fucking do. So I'm just going to put that out there. Our immigrants, our refugees, they are precious resources, and they need to be treated like precious resources. And obviously that's not how they're being treated right now. They're being treated more as scavengers or parasites or unwanted pests, and that's simply unacceptable. Like, we need to grow. You can talk about it like it's racism, because it is racism under settler colonial conditions. That's exactly what that is. Settler colonial states across the world are fixed and intentionally oppressive. They intentionally restrict the movement of people as well as the movement of product. That's what they do. So yes, you can absolutely talk about it within the context of racism, and decolonization, as well as a return to indigenous practices or an honoring of indigenous perspective. 100%, and we should, because indigenous people are also, as I mentioned at the beginning, in possession of precious knowledge and resources that should not pass from this earth if we can help it. We are going to have to do double the work if we let these things disappear. So it really behooves us as people, as thinking creatures, to consider other people as though they have precious knowledge and info, whoever they are, based on their experiences, based on their intersectional identities, and to honor them for these things, to help change the cultural dynamic when it comes to respect and who we respect and why. One other thing I do want to leave you with, and this is just, kind of cute, but oh gosh, I've wanted a face tattoo for a long time, and obviously my experience of culture has frowned on these things. You know, how are you going to get a job with that kind of thing? And I've fought that through most of my life. You know, when it comes to like tattoos in general, I have plenty of them. And when I got my hand tattoos, when my sister and I did my finger tattoos, our finger tattoos, you know, it was an intentional closing of certain doors and saying like, I don't want what that offers, what a place that would denigrate this particular form of body modification, this particular form of self-beautification. I don't want what they have to offer, and I choose that. So the face tattoo is sort of the pinnacle of that for me, and I've been waiting until I felt like, you know, fully committed to the whole concept, because that's an important part of getting a tattoo. You know, you want to be committed to every aspect of it. And the thing that I chose to do, and I'm going to just share it with you because I love it. But I read this scientific article about subjective well-being. And in psychology, subjective well-being is the best measure we have for happiness, or it's one of the measures we have for happiness, subjective well-being. And it's a complex construct that uses a variety of different scales or different measures in order to kind of triangulate on this idea of happiness. Because most people like want to be happy, right? And we want people to be happy. From a animal husbandry sense, happy animals are, you know, well taken care of animals. Happy animals are good animals, and we are animals, and we want to be well taken care of. We want to take care of one another. We want to take care of ourselves well, and we want to be happy creatures. So this idea of like what creates subjective well-being, how do you make happiness? Like, can you science happiness? And plenty of people would say, no, it's so dynamic. Happiness is way too individualistic to science it up. But, you know, this article I read was basically kind of looking into this idea of subjective well-being. And specifically, they wanted to know whether having multiple strong identities, like social identities in the world, contributed to or took away from one's subjective well-being. And you can imagine the implications for this when we think about intersectional identities. If you think about a Black Indigenous woman who is poor, right? And let's add gay in there, right? Is she happier or less happy under the current system? And obviously system factors matter. But that's not really what the topic of this article was. The topic of this article was actually, this is slightly more interesting, what they found. And you know, I'm paraphrasing, and I wasn't part of the researchers, so please go look this up. You're gonna have to find it for yourself. But part of what they were finding through this particular experiment was that when somebody's identities are both strongly held and they have more of them and they consider them positive, not consider them positive. When they feel cohesion between their identities, there we go. It doesn't matter whether they consider them positive or negative, or whether the system treats them positively or negatively based on those identities. It's whether or not the person feels that their identities are cohesive with one another, where they hang together well. In short, like whether or not they consider themselves a mosaic and a multifaceted creature versus, you know, like a broken mirror. So that was actually the biggest predictor for happiness. And the more identities you have that, you know, that you place a sense of value or importance in, the better, as long as you have cohesion. But if you have more identities and less cohesion, the less happy you'll be. And if you have less identities but consistent or strong cohesion, the happier you'll be. And that sounds like a fucking no duh moment to people like living and experiencing these things. And that was one of my biggest challenges when I was studying psychology, was that everything I learned, I was like, am I stupid? Like, am I not getting this? Or is this stupid? Like, is it just stating plainly the actual reality of things we already know? And I really struggled with that a lot, because none of it was stupid. It was actually very, very sophisticated, very, very intelligent. But it was long form elaborating through the use of scientific method, something that we experience so intimately as living creatures, as purely psychological beings at the end of the day, right? Like purely subjective beings. It was elaborating this super long form thing that sounded sort of silly when you put it out loud, right? And that's a lot of psychology. People find it easy to brush off psychology because it's like, oh yeah, well, duh, I know that. But it's worth elaborating these things. It's worth being able to write them down, to put them out there, and to reference them, and to be like, no, we have tested these hypotheses. We have a certain amount of knowledge about these things in an empirical way. And I guess that brings me back to living an embodied experience or means of knowing, and the balance with knowing things in a more long form, slowly elaborated, written down, and empirically tested kind of way. You do need both to have a stable structure, as long as you find the middle. Oh boy, wow, I sure came back around there. And yeah, so this was supposed to be about home, but what's home to me is my country, and I am talking about my country very, very explicitly here, and specifically the different underpinning themes that are essentially pulling us in twain, I suppose. And yeah, that might as well be a Mark Twain reference. But okay, yeah, I have like a few more minutes, so I'm just gonna, I know I said that there are two main inhibitors or causes of apathy when talking about like mindful solutions, Aesop Rock, mindful solutions in addressing these issues that we face with decolonization and with creating cycles of healing rather than perpetuating cycles of violence. And the main thing that I have already kind of elaborated and discussed is this small step from point A to B. It's very disheartening for people who have been massively oppressed and their lives cut short and made so much worse by a system that absolutely hates them and treats them like they are hated. It's very hard for those people to engage with system layers such as legislature or policy or any of these things, executive branches, enforcement, as though they deserve to exist, right? Like those things that have been harming you, that have been actively oppressing you and resisting your life, don't have a right to exist, and they should be completely dismantled or deconstructed. I am more for that than I am for taking and tailoring them to our use, in the sense that liberation of all people should come first, and I fully have faith that we can build something better with what remains, because we won't lose all of our living knowledge in the world even if we destroy the libraries. Now, do I think we should destroy libraries? Absolutely not. I don't think anybody's saying destroy libraries, but the Library of Congress is also a library. So, yeah, and museums too. Like, in what way are we taking these things completely apart and rebuilding with entirely new design? And which things are we actively appropriating for our own use and towards our own ends? And I say our because I count myself in with the resistance. I count myself in with revolution. Anything that oppresses others or makes them less than human, dehumanizes them as people, I am violently against. So Yeah, we have a lot of work to do, but the apathy sets in at that part, right? The apathy sets in right there at the crossroads of your mortal life and how you know you're never going to be able to see the end of this fight. Not really, not real freedom, not the real end. And all the baby steps that are going to have to come in order to solve it. It is exhausting, it's grinding, it's excruciating, and it's worse for people who have it worse. So, that's obviously a huge challenge that we're fucking facing, and I don't want to diminish it by being so positive all the time. What I do want to do is point out the other thing, the other hurdle that people have, the other cause of apathy besides how do you get from point A to point B, um, is how do we know it just won't repeat itself? Like, how do we know that all of the fight, no, that wasn't it. That was just me making something up. I can't remember what my second point was, and we're out of time. So I'll try to bring it back next time if I remember. I'm sure I will. I've just spoken way too much. I've cluttered my air with too many of my own words, and now have been losing track of where that second point was. So after, I have time to think or give this a re-listen, I'll bring it back later, and hopefully you will still be here listening. Thank you again for listening.